Emmett Rousseau's boots were soaked through by the time he found her. A child, no older than 5, curled beneath the underpass on Kerr Street, shivering in a coat 3 sizes too big, clutching a stuffed rabbit so filthy its color was anyone's guess. The temperature had dropped to -18. Snow was falling sideways. And Emmett had exactly $9 and change in his wallet, a bus pass that expired tomorrow, and a daughter at home who needed him back before her insulin shot at 7. Smart thing was to keep walking. But the girl's lips were turning blue, and Emmett Rousseau had buried 1 child already. He was not about to watch another one die. The evening had started badly enough. 3 hours earlier, Emmett had been standing in the loading bay of Fraserton Cold Storage, where he'd worked nights for the past 14 months. His supervisor, a red-faced man named Gauthier, had pulled him aside and handed him a manifest. Repackage the expired product, swap the date labels, send it out with the morning's shipment. Standard practice, Gauthier had said. Everyone does it. Emmett had refused. Not loudly, not with drama, just a quiet no, a shake of the head, and a look that said he meant it. Gauthier fired him on the spot. Didn't even let him finish his shift. Ken. Now Emmett walked the 3 kilometers home along the canal path because he couldn't afford a cab, and the bus didn't run this route after 10. Cold bit through his work jacket and settled into his bones. He thought about Nadia waiting at home. 11 years old, sharp as a tack and diabetic since she was 6. Her insulin supply was running low. The pharmacy wouldn't refill without payment. And the rent, $1,450 for a basement apartment in Hamilton that smelled like mildew and had a furnace that kicked on only when it felt like it, was due in 4 days. He thought about the way Nadia never complained. Not when dinner was toast and canned soup for the 2nd night running. Not when the other kids at school asked why she wore the same shoes every day. Not even when she had to prick her own finger because Emmett's hands shook too badly from the cold to do it for her. Last Tuesday, she'd asked him a question that still circled in his head like a dog chasing its tail. Dad, does doing the right thing ever actually help, or does it just make you feel better about losing? Emmett hadn't known how to answer. He wanted to say that integrity was its own reward, that character mattered more than circumstance. But standing in their damp apartment with the ceiling stains spreading and the fridge humming its death rattle, the words tasted like cardboard. How do you teach your kid about honor when honor just cost you your paycheck? The sound reached him before the sight did, a thin, high whimpering, half cry, half moan, drifting from beneath the Kerr Street underpass. Emmett slowed. The canal path was empty, no joggers, no dog walkers, just snow and silence and that small, broken sound. He found her wedged between a concrete pylon and a rusted shopping cart. A girl, 5, maybe 6, brown skin, dark hair matted against her forehead, lips cracked and pale, no mittens, no hat, no boots. The oversized coat was men's, a grown man's parka, draped over her like a blanket. She wasn't crying anymore. She was past crying. Her breathing came in shallow, hitching gasps, and her eyes, when they opened, didn't seem to see him. Hey! Emmett crouched down, his knees cracking against the frozen ground. Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me? No response. Her fingers twitched around the stuffed rabbit, but that was all. He looked up and down the path. Nobody, not a single soul. Nearest house was half a kilometer away, and the underpass had no cell service. Emmett pulled out his phone, a prepaid device with 12 minutes left on it, and climbed the embankment until he got a bar. He dialed 911 and spoke fast. The dispatcher told him an ambulance would be 20 to 25 minutes. Winter storm, she explained. Every unit in the city was stretched. 20 minutes. The girl's skin was ice. Emmett pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her, then lifted her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel her heartbeat through the layers, faint, irregular, too fast and too slow at the same time. He started walking toward the main road, his teeth chattering, his shirt soaked with snow within seconds. A thought crept in as he walked. He could set her down by the road, flag the ambulance, and leave before anyone started asking questions. A black man carrying an unconscious child through a snowstorm at 11 at night. He knew exactly how that would look. He knew the questions that would follow. He knew how little his explanation would matter once the assumptions took hold. And Nadia was home, alone. Mrs. Okafor from upstairs was watching her, but she'd said she could only stay until midnight. It was already 11:15. Emmett looked down at the girl's face, so small, so still. He thought about the box in his closet, the one he never opened. The tiny pink shoes that had belonged to Celeste, his younger daughter, who'd died of meningitis at age 3 because the walk-in clinic had sent them home twice, saying it was just a flu. He thought about the drive to the hospital that final night, how he'd held Celeste against his chest exactly like this, feeling her heartbeat grow fainter with every red light. He couldn't set this child down, not tonight, not ever. When the ambulance arrived, Emmett rode with her. The paramedics asked if he was family. He said no. They asked how he found her. He told them the truth. They looked at his soaked shirt, his shaking hands, and said nothing. At St. Joseph's Hospital, the girl disappeared behind double doors, and Emmett was left standing in the waiting area, shivering with no jacket and no way to get home. He called Mrs. Okafor and begged her to stay. He could hear Nadia in the background asking if Dad was okay. "I'm fine, baby," Emmett said into the phone, though he wasn't sure that was true. A nurse approached with a clipboard. The child had no identification, no health card, no emergency contact. She was hypothermic and malnourished, and there were older bruises on her arms that told a story no one wanted to hear. Someone needed to sign the intake forms. Someone needed to authorize treatment beyond basic stabilization. "I found her under a bridge," Emmett said. "I don't know who she is." The nurse studied him. "Sir, without a guardian's authorization, we can stabilize her, but anything further requires consent. Children's Aid has been notified, but with the storm, their response time is, what happens if nobody signs? She stays in the ER, stabilized, but that's it." Emmett looked at the clipboard. He thought about the bruises on the girl's arms. He thought about Celeste's pink shoes in the box he never opened. He picked up the pen and signed. Emmett Joseph Rousseau, guarantor for a child whose name he didn't know, whose life was now tangled with his in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. 3 days passed and no one came for her. Emmett returned to St. Joseph's every morning, taking the bus with his expiring pass, hoping to find her room empty and a note saying her family had arrived. Instead, he found the same girl in the same bed, her dark eyes open now but empty of recognition. The nurses had started calling her Doe. Children's Aid had opened a file and moved on to other cases, and the system, vast, bureaucratic, underfunded, had swallowed her into its gears. On the third morning, a hospital social worker cornered him in the hallway. A woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much. "Mr. Rousseau, we need to discuss the child's placement." Emmett's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, placement? She's medically stable, but our beds are needed. Children's Aid has a group home in Brantford with an opening, but the transfer won't happen for another 2 weeks minimum." Alternatively, she paused. "If you're willing to serve as an emergency foster placement, we can fast-track the paperwork. Take her home." A traumatized child he didn't know into an apartment that barely fit him and Nadia. He thought about Nadia's insulin, about the rent, about the fridge that held half a carton of milk and 3 eggs. "I'll take her," he heard himself say. Nadia Rousseau was not the kind of 11-year-old who startled easily. She'd learned to give herself injections before most kids learned cursive. She'd held her father's hand at Celeste's funeral and hadn't cried until they got home. But when Emmett carried a silent, wide-eyed girl through their front door, even Nadia took a step back. "Dad, who is she?" Emmett set the girl down on the couch, their only piece of furniture long enough for sleeping. "I found her a few days ago. She was outside in the cold, all alone. She doesn't have anyone to take care of her right now. Is she going to live with us?" "For a little while." Nadia studied the girl's face with the same careful attention she gave to everything. Then she walked to her bedroom, came back with her second pillow and her grandmother's quilt, and tucked them around the girl without being asked. "She looks scared," Nadia said. "Even when she's not moving, she looks scared." Emmett didn't know what to say to that. The first week was brutal. The girl didn't speak. Not a word, not a sound. She ate when food was placed in front of her and stared at the wall when it wasn't. She flinched at sudden movements. She wouldn't let Emmett come within arm's reach, pressing herself into the corner of the couch if he stepped too close. At night, she cried, a silent, shaking cry that was worse than screaming. Emmett took whatever work he could find. Shoveling driveways, hauling scrap metal, doing oil changes in neighbors' garages for cash. He spent his nights on the kitchen floor with a sleeping bag, having given up the couch. His back ached, his hands were raw. And every morning he woke to find Nadia sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the girl, reading to her from library books in a quiet, steady voice. It was Nadia who broke through. On the 8th day, Emmett was making oatmeal on the stove when he heard something that made him freeze. Laughter. Small and rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years, but laughter. He turned to find Nadia showing the girl how to make shadow puppets on the wall, and the girl, for the first time, was smiling. That evening, the girl spoke. Layla. Emmett and Nadia both went still. The girl was sitting on the couch, the stuffed rabbit in her lap, her eyes fixed on Nadia. That's my name, Layla. And then, like a dam breaking, the rest came. Not all at once, but in fragments over the following days. She remembered a big house. She remembered a man who yelled. She remembered a woman who cried. She remembered being put in a car at night and a long drive, and then being left under the bridge with the man's parka and the stuffed rabbit and the instruction to wait. Someone would come for her, the man had said. But no one did. Heard. What Layla didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her full name was Layla Margot Ashford Pelletier, and her maternal grandfather was Jean-Luc Pelletier, the mining magnate whose family controlled one of the largest nickel operations in northern Ontario. Pelletier's face had been on the front page of the Globe and Mail 6 times in the past year alone. His fortune was estimated at $1.4 billion, and for the past 11 days his security team had been tearing the country apart looking for his granddaughter. The story broke on a Wednesday. Emmett was walking Nadia to school when he noticed the looks. Not the usual glances, something sharper, more deliberate. By noon, his phone was buzzing with unknown numbers. By evening, a CTV crew was parked outside his building. The headline made his throat close. Missing Pelletier heiress found in Hamilton basement apartment. Man under investigation. They didn't call him a kidnapper. They didn't have to. The footage told the story they wanted told. Shots of his crumbling building next to photos of the Pelletier estate in Sudbury. A poor black man. A rich white child. The math wrote itself. Children's Aid arrived with police. They took Layla. She screamed. The first loud sound Emmett had ever heard her make, and reached for Nadia with both hands. Nadia stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face, saying, it's okay to a child who was being carried away by strangers. The Pelletier family descended on Hamilton like a weather system. Lawyers, security, PR consultants, all of them moving with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to controlling outcomes. Emmett was brought to a downtown office tower for what they called a voluntary conversation. The building was all glass and polished concrete, and Emmett, in his worn work boots and patched jacket, felt like a smudge on clean paper. They asked him everything: how he found her, why he brought her home, what she told him, what he planned to do with the information. He answered honestly because honesty was the only thing he had, but he could see it in their eyes. The truth was too simple. A poor man with no angle, no scheme, no agenda. It didn't compute in their world. They let him go with instructions that felt like a blade held sideways. Stay away from the child. Do not contact the family. Do not speak to media. What followed was a slow-motion destruction. Reporters camped outside his apartment. The garage where he'd been picking up work told him to stop coming. His landlord, who'd been patient about late rent, suddenly discovered code violations that required immediate vacating. And Nadia, quiet, steady, brave Nadia, came home from school one afternoon and sat on the kitchen floor and didn't speak for 2 hours. When she finally talked, her voice was flat. Jalen said his mom told him, "You stole that girl." He said, "You're going to prison." He said, "I'm going to foster care." Emmett knelt in front of his daughter. "Look at me, Nadia. Did I steal anyone? Did I do anything wrong?" "No. Then what does Jalen's mom know that you don't?" "Nothing." Nadia's jaw was tight. "She doesn't know anything. That's right. People are going to say things. Some of them will be mean. Some of them will be lies. But you know who I am. You were there. You read to that girl every day and you made her laugh for the first time. Nobody can take that from you. Nobody." Nadia nodded, but something in her eyes had hardened, and Emmett hated the world for putting it there. That night, after Nadia fell asleep, someone shattered the front window of their apartment with a brick. Attached was a note with 2 words, "Child Predator." Emmett swept the glass in the dark, boarded the window with cardboard, and sat on the kitchen floor until dawn, listening to the furnace click on and off, thinking about every choice that had led him here. He'd saved a child's life, and now his daughter was paying the price. By the end of the week, Emmett made the decision to go silent. He blocked numbers, ignored reporters, refused to engage. He found a new job at a warehouse in Burlington where nobody recognized him. He told Nadia they were going to move forward and forget. It almost worked. For 5 days, the noise faded. The reporters moved on. The landlord backed off after legal aid sent a letter. But the silence ate at him. Every night he saw Layla's face, the way she'd reached for Nadia as they carried her away. He saw the bruises on her arms that nobody seemed interested in explaining. And he heard Nadia's question from weeks ago, the one that had started everything. Does doing the right thing ever actually help? He'd never answered her, and now his silence was its own answer. No. Doing the right thing gets you punished, and then you shut up and take it. Nadia saw through him on day 6. Dad. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, looking so much like her mother that it stopped his breath. "You told me that character means doing right even when it costs you. You said that after Celeste died. You said the world didn't get to decide who we are. So why are you letting it decide now?" Emmett stared at his daughter, 11 years old and braver than he'd ever been. She was right. If he backed down now, every word he'd ever said to her would turn to ash. Every lesson about courage, about integrity, about standing up, all of it would become a lie. And Nadia would spend the rest of her life knowing that her father had folded when it mattered most. The knock came 2 nights later. Emmett opened the door to find a woman he didn't recognize. Early 30s, dark circles under her eyes, expensive coat over what looked like hospital scrubs. She was holding a folder. "Mr. Rousseau, my name is Colette Ashford. Layla is my daughter." Emmett studied her face. He could see Layla in the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. "I know you want nothing to do with my family," Colette said. "But you need to see what's in this folder." She spread documents across his kitchen table. Police reports that had been filed and then quietly withdrawn. Medical records showing a pattern of injuries. Financial transfers to a man named Decker. Colette's ex-husband, Layla's father, paid from the Pelletier family trust. Phone records, hotel receipts. A timeline that told a story no press release had mentioned. "My ex-husband is Marcus Decker," Colette said. "My father arranged our marriage to secure mineral rights in northwestern Ontario. When I tried to leave, my father sided with Marcus. When Marcus became violent, my father paid for silence. When I finally ran with Layla, Marcus found us. He took her and left her under that bridge as a message to me. Come back or lose your daughter." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she kept going. "My father knows, he's always known. But the merger depends on the Decker family's mining claims, and $400 million is more important to him than one small girl." Emmett stared at the documents. "Why are you bringing this to me? You have lawyers. You have resources." "Because my father controls every lawyer I've ever hired. His people monitor my phone, my email, my movements. But they're not watching you. As far as they're concerned, you're nobody." She held the folder out to him. "You saved my daughter when no one else would. You brought her into your home and let your own child love her back to life. I watched the footage from the hospital, the way Layla reached for your daughter when they took her. My girl hasn't trusted anyone in 2 years, and she trusted you in 8 days. Colette's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who would trade anything for money. I never knew what it looked like when someone sacrificed for nothing except because it was right. You showed me. Now I'm asking you to help me fight for my daughter the way you already have. Emmett took the folder. It was heavier than paper should be. I don't need you to fight for me, he said, but I could use someone's standing beside me. The press conference was held 4 days later in the community room of the Hamilton Public Library on Main Street. Emmett chose it deliberately. Not a law firm, not a tower. A room with children's book posters on the walls and folding chairs that wobbled. The room filled fast. Cameras, reporters, and a handful of people from the neighborhood who'd seen the headlines and wanted the real story. Emmett stood behind a table with a microphone that buzzed. His face still showed the fatigue of 3 weeks without proper sleep. His hands were rough, but his voice didn't waver. My name is Emmett Rousseau. 3 weeks ago, I found a little girl freezing under the Kerr Street underpass. I called an ambulance. I stayed with her at the hospital. And when nobody came to claim her, I brought her to my home so she wouldn't disappear into a system that's already failing too many kids. He paused. I didn't know she was Layla Ashford Pelletier. I didn't know her grandfather was a billionaire. I didn't know anything about her except that she was cold and scared and alone, and that I'd buried my own daughter 3 years ago and I wasn't going to stand by while another child died. The room was silent. Since then, I've been called a kidnapper. I've lost work. I've had a brick thrown through my window. My 11-year-old daughter has been bullied at school, all because I picked up a child who'd been abandoned in a snowstorm. He looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for money. I'm here because the truth matters and because a little girl is still not safe. Layla Ashford Pelletier was not lost. She was taken by her father, Marcus Decker, as an act of coercion against her mother. She was left in sub-zero temperatures to die or be found. It didn't matter to him which, and there are people with the power and the money to have stopped this long ago who chose to look the other way. Colette took the microphone next. She wore no makeup. Her hands shook. But she spoke clearly, and she named names, and she presented evidence that the room full of journalists could verify within the hour. The aftermath moved fast. Marcus Decker was arrested in Thunder Bay 2 days later. The evidence was too public, too documented, too damning to bury. The Pelletier family's PR machine tried to spin it. The concerned grandfather, the family torn apart by tragedy. But the cracks were already too wide. Jean-Luc Pelletier's shares in Northern Meridian Mining dropped 9% in one trading session. Board members started asking questions that had no comfortable answers. Jean-Luc Pelletier came to Emmett's apartment on a Saturday morning. Alone. No lawyers, no security, no handler. Just a 71-year-old man in a cashmere coat standing in a hallway that smelled like someone's cooking and old carpet. Emmett almost didn't open the door. Mr. Rousseau, may I come in? Emmett considered refusing. He had every reason to. But the man standing before him didn't look like the face on the financial pages, all granite jaw and boardroom authority. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man who'd been running numbers his entire life and had just realized the most important ones didn't appear on any balance sheet. Emmett stepped aside. Pelletier sat on the couch where his granddaughter had slept. He looked at the children's drawings taped to the fridge. Nadia's careful sketches alongside the shaky crayon marks that Layla had made during her final days here. His expression cracked, just for a moment before he reassembled it. I came to offer you compensation, he said. A house, a trust for your daughter's education. Enough to ensure you never have to choose between rent and insulin again. And what exactly would you be paying me for? For saving my granddaughter's life. For protecting her when the people who should have protected her, when he stopped, started again. For being the man I was not. Emmett leaned against the kitchen counter. I didn't save Layla for money. I saved her because she was a kid freezing under a bridge, and I have hands, and I have a coat, and I have a door I could open. That's it. That's the whole story. Then what do you want? Emmett thought about it. He thought about Nadia, about Celeste, about the pink shoes in the box he still couldn't open. He thought about Layla reaching for his daughter as strangers carried her away. He thought about every parent in every basement apartment in this city, choosing between groceries and medication, between dignity and survival. I want Layla to be safe. Not Pelletier family safe, where safety means lawyers and silent money thrown at problems until they disappear. Actually safe. With her mother, with access to the help she needs. That's non-negotiable, and that's not a favor, it's what you owe her. Pelletier nodded slowly. Beyond that, I want Nadia to grow up in a world where a man can carry a freezing child to a hospital without having his life destroyed for it. I want my daughter to believe that courage isn't punished, that speaking truth doesn't get your window smashed. Emmett met the old man's eyes. You want to pay me back? Fund a children's crisis shelter in this neighborhood. Not with your name on it. Not for the tax write-off. Because it's right. Because there are kids under every bridge in this city, and most of them don't get found. The silence in the room had weight. And be the grandfather Layla deserves. That's worth more than anything you could wire to my account. Pelletier stared at him for a long time. Then he nodded, once slowly, like a man accepting a verdict he'd known was coming. How do you do it? Pelletier asked quietly. How do you teach a child to be good when the world makes it so costly? Emmett thought about Nadia. About the question she'd asked him that night, the one that started everything. You don't teach it with speeches. You teach it by doing it. Every day, every choice, every time you pick what's hard over what's easy, they see everything, and they become what they see. Pelletier stood and offered his hand. Emmett shook it. Something passed between them. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but something like the first plank of a bridge that might, with time and effort, bear weight. The old man left without another word. Emmett closed the door and turned to find Nadia standing in the hallway, still in her pajamas, the ones with the little astronauts on them, her arms folded, her expression a complicated mix of pride and curiosity and something older than 11. Was that Layla's grandpa? Yeah, kiddo. It was. Is he going to help? I think so. I think he might be starting to. Nadia thought about this. Layla drew me a picture before they took her. Did you see it? It's on the fridge. It's me and her and you, and we're all holding hands, and there's a sun. Emmett looked at the drawing. 3 figures, 1 tall, 2 small, standing in front of a yellow circle. Beneath it, in shaky letters, Layla had written the only word she knew how to spell. Safe. Dad? Nadia said. Yeah? Are we still broke? Emmett smiled. Yeah, Nadia, we're still broke, but we did the right thing. We did. Nadia considered this with the gravity of someone who'd learned to measure blood sugar before she learned long division. You know what? I think doing the right thing did help. Not the way math helps, where you get an answer, but the other way. The way that matters. Emmett pulled his daughter into a hug that lasted longer than either of them planned. He breathed in the smell of her shampoo and felt her heartbeat against his, steady, strong, certain. Yeah, he said softly, the way that matters. Outside, Hamilton hummed with the sound of a city waking up. Somewhere in Sudbury, Jean-Luc Pelletier was making phone calls he'd never made before. In a family court office in Thunder Bay, Colette Ashford was filing for sole custody with evidence that could no longer be suppressed. And in a children's temporary care facility on the outskirts of Burlington, a 5-year-old girl was clutching a filthy stuffed rabbit and telling a social worker, for the first time, in her own words, what had happened to her. She was not afraid anymore. A man she'd never met before had carried her through a snowstorm, and his daughter had read to her every day, and for 8 days she had lived in a tiny apartment with a stained ceiling and a broken furnace, and it was the safest she had ever been. But here, in this basement apartment, with its boarded window and its humming fridge, a different kind of wealth filled the room. The kind that didn't show up on stock tickers or balance sheets. The kind that passed from parent to child in quiet mornings and hard choices, and the stubborn, costly, unreasonable belief that doing right was not a transaction. It was a way of living, and it was the richest thing Emmett Rousseau had to give. Nadia slipped her hand into her father's, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm, and together they watched the winter sun climb above the rooftops, painting the snow gold. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. Emmett Rousseau had nothing but his integrity, and it turned out to be worth more than all the money in the world. If this story reminded you that kindness still matters, that doing right is never wasted, even when the cost is high, then carry that with you. And if you'd like to hear more stories about ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary, subscribe to this channel and join us for the next one. Until then, remember, the richest thing you can give anyone is a good heart.